Hello and welcome to week 2 of our Mockingbird tutorials. We're in a sewing room. I know, it's amazing. Not quite as tidy as I would have liked it to be, but we have got there. There is floor space and everything's all plugged in, so we're ready and raring to go. So last week we looked at your pattern envelope and this week we're going to look at its contents. Let's get started. So last week we looked at the pattern envelope. This is what I'm going to be using here. Today we're going to look at its contents. So if you open your pattern envelope, you will find several different pieces of paper. So we've got this one. Now this at the moment may look like a bunch of lines and numbers. This is actually your pattern. This is what you're going to pin onto your material to cut out the outlines of various bits of your garment. We're going to leave that one for now. We're just going to put it to one side and we're going to come back to it and look at it again next week. You will also find a couple of A3 sheets, other A3 sheets, and these are your pattern instructions. The one you want to look at first is the sheet with the garment outlines on it. Okay, so we're going to open it out. Now they are quite big and they do look quite daunting. You'll see they're divided into several different parts. You can see them there. And most pattern instructions include the following different areas. You'll have the garment outlines and the pieces up here. You'll have the cutting layouts, which here are at the bottom of the sheet. You'll have the general directions, which are here on this sheet, and then turn it over, you'll have the sewing directions. Okay, so we are going to look at each of these first few sections in turn. We're going to go through them, and I'm also going to deal with some of the vocabulary that you might not be familiar with and you might not have come across before. So let's start with the garment outlines and the pattern pieces. On the left here, you'll see the basic garment outlines as you saw on the pattern envelope last week. What you'll also notice about these is that there are letters under each of the drawings. Now, these are useful and relevant when it comes to matching the various pattern pieces to the garment in question, the garment you want to make. So the first thing you need to do is identify which of the chosen garments you've decided to create. Now, I'm going to be working on garment A. So then I go to the list on this side here. Now this list outlines all of the various different parts that are included in each of the garments. Okay, so if I'm using pattern A, for example, the letters here refer to the garments. So I need piece 1 for the front, piece 2 for the back, piece 3 is the front facing, piece 4 is the back facing. Okay, so these drawings up here then match the drawings on your pattern sheets, which are on the other piece of paper that we're going to deal with next week. All of them are numbered, so they will match up with these pieces. So I will need pattern 1, pattern 2, pattern 3, and pattern 4. Okay? I don't need any of the others. None of the others are relevant to the garment that I'm making. What I usually do is just take a pen and circle the various different numbers that I'll need. You'll also notice on these drawings here the arrows. Now these arrows, I'll come to it in just a minute in more detail, but they basically tell you in which direction the pattern pieces should be placed on your material when you cut them out. This is really important because the way the pattern pieces are placed on the material affects the grain line of the material, how it sits, and also how it'll fasten to the other pieces. So now we're going to move on to the cutting layouts section of your pattern. Now the purpose of this section is to show you where best to place your pattern pieces on your material in order to maximise your fabric. Okay, so if you have a look here, you see a square piece, a square drawing, which is meant to represent your fabric, and on top the same pieces as you saw up here, laid out as they would be on your material. Okay, now you'll notice a couple of new words here, so we'll just deal with those quickly. Selvage, let's use Bertie to illustrate. So something like Bertie, where the pattern runs that way anyway. Your selvage, you'll be able to notice it because you'll see it's been finished off here, okay, which means it won't fray along the edge. It's usually dotted and looks slightly different. This is your selvage, this is your side bit, all right? So what's happened here on this drawing is they folded the material lengthwise in half, okay, because some pieces need to be cut on the fold. Best cut on the fold, some don't, okay? So your selvages would go together and you'd have a fold along one side. So for my garment, dress A, I would use my pieces, as I said before, 1, 2, 3 and 4, and I also, down here it says I also need interfacing for pieces 3 and 4. Now interfacing is something a little bit different again. This is a specially designed fabric which is placed between the garment and the facing to give it support, so it just gives it a little more rigidity. It's used on things like collars, sometimes on button plackets as well. So something else we need to bear in mind is this key up here, which tells you which way round your pattern pieces should be placed on the material, so upside down or the right way up. So printed side down or printed side up. The majority are printed side up on this picture here, except one of pattern 3 here, which is printed side down. As I said, the important part of the cutting layout section really is that it helps you to maximise your material. It will show you where the best places to fit all the patterns are. You don't want to be wasting material. It isn't the cheapest thing in the world, so you do want to be making the most of it where you can. I will show you another way of maximising your fabric as well when you've got lots of things to cut on folds, but we'll look at that next week when we come to cutting our pattern pieces. Okay, so last but by no means least, we're going to look at the general directions section of your leaflet. Now, not all of these things are going to be relevant first time round. You can look at them in more detail when you become more experienced, but all I'm going to do today is point out the bits that I feel might be relevant to us now that we're starting out, and I don't want to overcomplicate things. So if I don't go through everything and there's something you really want to know about, drop me a message and I'll explain it to you. But otherwise, let's just stick to the basics for now. So here under the pattern, we've got an outline of the symbols, like a key of the symbols that you might find on your pattern when we start cutting it out next week. So here at the top, we've got the grain line. Now this is the line that follows the grain of the fabric. So this often runs parallel to the selvage. Do you remember that was what I talked about earlier? That's the finished edge of the material. Here we've got another symbol that you might see quite often. This indicates where you need to place the edge of your pattern on the fold of the fabric. So this, for example, is a centre line, a vertical centre of a bodice or something where both sides need to be the same, need to be symmetrical. The easiest way to do that is to place it on the fold of the fabric. Notches, you'll see those on the pattern as well. For these, I just snip in to the edge of the material, and what they help you to do is they help you to line up various pieces of material when you sew them together. The dots, they're similar. They help you to mark where things like buttons should go, various fastenings, fixtures, fastenings, also things like pockets. So they're on the pattern, but you also need to put them onto your material so that you know where, when they're cut out, where everything sits. Now the seam allowance in the majority of cases is 5/8 of an inch, which is 1.5 centimetres. Now, unless it specifically states otherwise, your seam allowance, which is the amount of fabric allowed on a pattern for the sections of an item which are going to be joined together with a seam, this needs to be 1.5 centimetres from the edge of the fabric. Okay, all you need to know. They will tell you if that's not going to be the case, but this is why it's really important to read these directions and this part of the leaflet before you start sewing, because if you get into sewing your garment and your seam allowance is different, then the garment's going to be completely out of shape and out of size, which is really what you do not want. We're going to talk about pressing seams. When you've made your seam, you need to press it flat so that it's easier to sew and it sits better. And trimming the seams as well, so that reduces the bulk in the fabric again, so that helps it to sit better. Okay, so cutting and marking. I'm just going to deal briefly with this because there are some important things that I do that I feel make starting the garment a lot easier. Firstly, pressing your pattern pieces. If your pattern pieces have been scrunched up in the pattern envelope, if you haven't made them for ages and they've been folded over, just not put away properly, do press your pattern pieces with a warm, dry iron before you start cutting your pieces. Okay, because otherwise you're going to lose, even if it's just millimeters on your pattern when you start cutting it out, and that could make all the difference to the shape of your final piece. They often recommend pre-shrinking fabric. But I'm really guilty of possibly not doing that all the time. You can if you like. It's not a step I always follow. It depends on the nature of the fabric, really. Some fabric will react fine to being in the wash, but other fabrics do have more of a tendency, things like wool, do have more of a tendency to shrink. So just be guided by your type of fabric in this instance. Circle your cutting layout. That's something we looked at a little bit earlier. That was where you circle the letter and the pattern pieces that you will need for your particular garment, and then pin your pattern to your fabric as shown in the cutting layouts, which is again what I showed you under here. Okay, so that's it really in a nutshell. That's how to read your pattern leaflet instructions. If you do need any more details on this, if you're uncertain about anything, do drop me a message, because it can be quite it can look quite complicated, but actually it is straightforward and it tells you everything you need to know on this leaflet. As long as you read this first, you can't go far wrong. So that's it, another week done. Next week we're going to be actually cutting our pattern out. Really exciting. We are going to get started on our final garments. So make sure you join us next week. Hopefully no illnesses or technical hitches to hold us back for next week's session. But thank you all for being so patient anyway. It is unfortunately the nature of being self-employed and having a toddler. As I'm sure all of you will realise, that's the whole point of doing these tutorials, to show you that actually this is the reality. I'm a real mum, and these things do come up. But hopefully everything's going okay for you at the moment. Do get in contact with me. Tell me how you're getting on and what you're planning to make. I really, really do want to hear. And I will see you next week.